Hello and welcome to the first part of this breakdown series. In this video we're going to look at how you can work with kits from Kitbash3D in Maya, adapting them to suit our needs. We'll be using Arnold as our renderer, but the methods here are applicable to other renderers as well. We'll be working with the Fantasy kit here, but setting up shaders for this kit will be the same as with any other. Let's take a look at the scene. In this first part, we'll look at importing the models and applying Arnold shader to them. So let's go ahead and open up Fairytale native Kitbash. Now, the easiest way to go about this, if we look at the Hypershade, we've got a whole bunch of blend materials, and the fastest way to go ahead and convert all these shaders is you could go to Arnold, Utilities, and then to convert shaders to Arnold, and this will convert all the shaders automatically, but I haven't had the best results doing that, mostly because I think some of these materials will end up being, well, the textures will end up being piped into some of the wrong slots, so it'd probably be easier to just go ahead and do it manually, because we only have a handful of materials here anyway, so that's what we'll do. So let's start with this big castle, find out what materials on there. So it's graph network, stone blocks bin. So let's go tab, create an AI standard surface shader, and let's take the diffuse from the original shader and pipe it in to the base color. And then if we have a bump, which we do here, let's take that down and create an AI bump 2D. Feed that red channel into bump map and the out value into normal camera. Now, one thing is that all of these textures will be pointing into the wrong folder. So we need to go in to our general editors and our file path editor, resolve all of these file paths. So select all the textures, click Read Path Files, browse, and if you go to the folder, it should have downloaded with the kit. We've got KB3D textures, they're all in here. Set that path, click repath, and they're resolved. So we have all our textures now. If we go back into Hypershade, if we have a glossy map, we can use that as roughness. I'm not sure there was one for this texture, so for the time being, we'll set up a naming convention. We'll call our AI shaders KB3D, the original name, stone blocks, and then AI. And then select objects with the original material, as we selected those, and then assign our new shader to those. And then to keep this tidy, delete unused nodes. So here's our first shader, and then we can go along and do the rest of the shaders in the same way. Some of these will probably have normal maps instead. In that case, create an AI normal map rather than a bump 2D. And you can pipe that into the AI with the normal camera in an AI standard surface. So we'll go ahead and convert all these. I'll speed up the video for this part, but the process is the same for all of the shaders. Go through and select each one and convert them, and then we'll have a look at the scene with the HDRI once those are done. So now we've got all of the shaders converted to Arnold standard surface shaders, and they're all applied to the models. Some of these will need some tweaks. Basically, the things to note is that all of the normal maps have been piped into AI normals, and with the bump maps, that's another normal map. Bump 2D, actually, there's a mistake there. Normal. So you need a normal map for the normals and bump 2D for the bump maps. And in the cases of things like roughness, on some of these I've just cranked up the roughness and not used the roughness map, because in the native shaded versions they were using the bump maps or adapted diffuse map for roughness, and sometimes it looks a bit odd. You need to adapt these maps to the look that you're wanting to get, and also to how you're lighting it. So the most important thing now is to get a HDRI into the scene. So let's create one. I'm using HDRIs from HDRI Haven, which is a great place for really nice HDRIs, and they're free. Throw that in there. Let's see what this renders like. Okay, so not bad. We do have a few issues. This here is a normals problem. There's a couple of buildings that have this. I've noticed when you convert the shaders, whether or not you use the Arnold utility to do it, or if you just do it manually like we've done, you basically have some window frames and other things. If we crank up the resolution a little bit, be able to easily see it. Yeah, and they just seem to fire loads of rays everywhere, because you get all these horrible fireflies everywhere. So there's an easy fix for this. So let's go into one of our culprit buildings. Which one was it? This one. You can see, oh yeah, you can see it. So I select that. If you go to the modeling tab, mesh display, set to face. Let's render that now. There you go. There's another one there on the door frame. We'll need to do that as well. And if we look at the backs of these, I'm pretty sure there's one or two other buildings that are doing it. You can see there, that's another sign of it. So any sign of that, just go into the geometry that's doing that and just set the normals to face or reverse the normals, one of the two, and that should fix that issue. So if we go to this, fix this one as well, and then we'll move on. Mesh display set to face. Let's do it on the frames as well, and on the window frames. Mesh display set to face. See, that's fixed it. There you go. So no more craziness. So bear that in mind. It's not you've done anything wrong with these shaders. So once we've gone through and corrected those, because there's a few others that I think will need correcting, we'll move on to the next stage, which is using AI Colorjitter for variation. So part 2, we're going to introduce some variation into our models, and well, the shaders, break them up and make it easier to either scatter them or instance them, so you can just have more variations and break up your layout when you take these into your scene. So at the moment you can see quite a lot of these have the same textures that are tiled, and it looks good from a distance, but it would be nice to just break that up. So let's take one of these plastered buildings as an example. Open up the hypershade, graph the materials, and in the diffuse map, if we add an AI color jitter, feed the diffuse into the input and the out color to the base color, and then change the type to object, so we do it on a per object basis. So we can see the effect really easily. Let's just crank these values up so that we'll get some crazy colors, but we'll see the variation happening. So let's do a test render. So now you can see each object is getting a different color variation. So using that tool, you can lighten them, darken them, change the hue, etc. And that just makes it easier to create a bit of variation in the distance. So that's one trick. And for the next one, we'll use AI Curvature to enhance some of the details, such as the wooden kind of rafters. So part 3, AI Curvature. Let's go in to some of our wooden frames and grab the shader for that. Graph the materials. Now with the diffuse map, we want to create an AI color correct. Feed the diffuse into that, the out color to the base color. And then create an AI curvature map. This we're going to pipe into the add of the color correct. We'll leave it as convex, we just want it to affect the edges. And let's just leave the values at default for now and see what it does. So you can see it's lightened these edges here. It's probably a little bit too much. So let's alter it a little bit. It's half the multiply value, 0.5. Let's leave the radius as it is for now. A little bit softer in effect there. Perhaps if we reduce the radius by half, a bit more of a subtle effect. Depending on the distance you'll be viewing these from, you need to adjust it based on that. It won't be visible for very far away. Somewhat visible. It just creates the illusion of a little bit of wear and detail. It might need to have less of a multiply value on there, probably 0.2, something like that. That's another way just to fake a little bit of detail on the edges. You can see the edges are pinging out a little bit there. So that's working nicely. So part 4, we're going to have a look at how we can use different textures to create a little bit of breakup and variation in our layout. So here you can see the castle has got a different texture on it. I've added some moss and a little bit of dirt coming in on the roof. So let's have a look at the shader network for that. For the brick. So castle slate brick. I've got the textures for this from Texture Haven. It's well worth checking out this website. Give them a support on Patreon. A really fantastic resource. Got a whole load of different materials you can use, and they come with all the maps you'll need. So we have a quick look at this one. Get all of these different maps. You download something like this, you can use it here. This is what I've done. I've taken the castle slate brick material, fed all the maps into the respective slots. I've used a Place2D texture here. This is a nice little tip. So if you bring in all of the textures, they'll come in with their own one of these, and then if you want to tile it, it's a bit long to fill this all in. So if we just show you here, delete that, they come in with separate ones. If you just delete all of them but one, hold shift, or control rather, middle mouse to this little orange circle and drag it to the white one, then you can connect them all up there, and it just means you can control this really easily. So I've taken the AI, I've multiplied it over the albedo here with an AI layer RGBA, and we can use the same thing again, another layer map using a different, it's not a multiplied, this one it's just over. We put the diffuse, which is this, into layer 2, and on the top layer we put the decal, and then that's using the alpha for this as a way to layer it on top, and then you can just affect the strength. So that's how I've got the moss coming on from beneath there. I'll show you what those textures look like. These ones are from textures.com, so this is the kind of thing. If you rotate these in Maya with your map, your 2D texture, I think this one's not rotated, but another one, this one, yeah, rotated 180 degrees. I think this is probably the one. So you can just control where it is. So anyway, back to this one. So that's our first one. We've put the AI and the albedo together here. We've put a decal on, and then using the AI color correct and a noise as a kind of a mask, just created a bit of variation over the texture because it's tiled. So we don't want to be too obvious it's tiled. So this is just dropping the saturation a bit, making a few bits darker, and it's masked by the noise. So we break up the texture, and then another decal on top of that with another layer. So that's just a way of creating a nice bit of variation with a couple of textures. And then let's just have a quick look at displacement here. Actually, before we get onto that, also let's just talk about the UVs. So you'll see, looking at these two roofs, it's quite a different effect. I think they have the same shader, but obviously this one I've just tweaked the UV so that it's not tiling over and over again. The rest of the UVs in this, I think, are all set up for tiling, which it works fine with all of the materials it's supplied with. But if you put anything on top, you'll find you get an effect like this, which is not what you want. So you have to go in, like I've done here. Let's have a look at the UVs. Actually, it's a bit of a mess what I've done here, but the main thing is I've taken the shell, these parts of the roof, and I've made sure they're only on one UV tile, so there we're not getting loads and loads of those decals spread all over like with this one. If we look at that render again, if we look at the UVs of that, you can see they're huge for the tiling, and I think that's the case for most of these. So I've gone in and I've edited some of these. So any of the buildings that I've got closer in my layout, I've just made sure these are on a single UV tile. So it's worth just looking into doing that. Just that's not happened here, but some of these, like this one, I've just changed them a little bit. So you might need to do that if you're putting extra textures on. And so back to the displacement. If you have a displacement map, you'll need to set it up like this. So you just need to create a displacement shader and feed the red channel into displacement and the displacement into the displacement shader on the standard surface shader. So that's the first part, and then you'll need to have a look at creasing, because we don't have the edge loops in these models to subdivide them. So if I turn off creasing, let's go to Mesh Tools, Crease Tool. If you grab the Crease Tool, you can see the edges are thick here because I've already creased it. If I select them all, middle mouse to the left, and then you can see they're really thin now. So if I press 3 on the keyboard to smooth it, you can see it becomes very blobby and smooth because the creasing is off. Turn that off again, press 1, grab all the edges and crease them. So middle mouse to the right. And now if we try to smooth that, press 3. It's subdivided, but it's maintained those edges. They're not getting all blobby. So that means when we subdivide it with Arnold, so if I open up the attribute editor, in Arnold, I've got 5 iterations of subds on here. That means when it renders, we'll get tons of geometry and it won't be blobby. You know, it will be, the edges will still hold their shape. So look at that render. We've got that, but we've also got some nice detail coming through from that displacement map. So that's how you can use the displacement map with some of these models. It may not work perfectly with all of them, but in this case it's worked okay. And this is just for a distance shot, and it's just so we can get some nice spec hits on some of these little bits of detail. It looks nice in the distance if you have sun coming in on an angle or something like that. So that's how you can set up, you know, a nice variation like that, you know, with things like the moss, for example, displacement. And you'll see, like with roofs like this, I've added a few other things like decals the same. So it's just another way to break up the layout, create some variation, create some interest, and then you can start adding it to your scene and rendering with Arnold. So I hope that was helpful. If you have any other queries or comments, let me know down in the comments below. And if you found this helpful, please just drop us a like. And if you want any more tips and tricks or breakdown videos like these, subscribe, and again, let me know down in the comments if you find this kind of thing helpful. And thanks for watching.